on 106.5 FM and online. It's the After 5 guest with Wynne Thomas.
I'm time now for my After 5 guest on the programme. That is Tony Curtis and his book, Darkness in the City of Light, Nazi Occupation of Paris, France. Tony, thanks for your company this afternoon.
I'm delighted that the novel is receiving attention and glad to talk to you about it.
Great stuff. It's an unusual novel using actual factual documents. Why did you do it this way?
Because they're so fascinating. Sometimes you cannot improve on the facts. The central character in my novel is Dr. Marcel Petiot. Mm-hmm. He's a qualified doctor. He served in the First World War, and by the time that France is invaded and occupied in the Second, he's in Paris. There's a practice in Paris, and he claims to be a member of the resistance, and he kills 140-odd people. Ooh. And they were all enemies of France, except, of course, they weren't. And so he's a monstrous character, and you couldn't make anybody up as monstrous as that.
So he was a real doctor in Paris, yes?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So resistance work and killing, but other killings too. So he wasn't just a resistance worker, he was a murderer as well, then, really, was he?
Well, maybe he claimed to have a resistance group called the Fly Talks Group, and who were assassinating Germans and collaborators and others. But you know, what fascinated me about Petiot then became a fascination with the whole occupied city. How could you get away with that? What kind of alibi could you have? Nobody was asking questions, actually, if the odd body floated down the River Seine in Paris. It was a great time to change identity, to become someone else, to become an angel or a devil.
Yes, because he had several names, didn't he, as well as his own name, didn't he?
Yes. In fact, after it wasn't until a day in March the 11th, 1944, that from his practice emanated this thick, evil-smelling smoke, and people thought, what on earth is going on here? And then the police broke in and found out that he'd been killing and burning people right in the centre of Paris. He'd got away with it till then.
So you say bodies floated down the river, but I mean, they probably were lots of bodies floating down the river, weren't they?
Yeah.
Because resistance workers were at work all the time, weren't they, since the Nazis arrived?
Yeah. But it wasn't just the Germans and the Gestapo. There was the two other characters in my book are the Bonnie Lafont gang, and they were French crooks, but they worked for the Germans. A lot of the British agents who were captured and tortured were tortured by these French crooks. They did the Gestapo's work for them. It was a very fascinating and nightmarish time. You didn't know who was who and whether they were telling the truth. You could trust virtually nobody.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the documents are fascinating, as you say. I mean, there's one there from Heinrich Himmler about how to handle resistance workers, isn't there?
Yes. Well, I almost made that up. Look, some of the most outrageous things in my novel I didn't make up, and some of the day-to-day things I did make up to get from A to B in the plot of the novel. Mm-hmm. I mean, I didn't need to exaggerate anything. Once I started researching Marcel Petiot in Paris, I had far too much material, and more material than one voice could deal with. Yeah. And that's why it's a novel of various voices and different styles, because all these voices are giving you information and build up like a mosaic picture of a complex city and a fascinating story.
So where did you get the information from then? Where's the research coming from?
Okay. Over 30 years ago, I came across the Marcel Petiot story. There was one book written about him, and it was written by an American CIA man, and it was a very kind of partial and prejudiced version of events. I wrote a script which the Sherman Theatre in Cardiff put on as a workshop production, and it was so long ago we had projected slides as the special effects. It did not transfer to the West End. So it got put back in my filing cabinet. I came across it again a couple of years ago, just before we were moving house, and read through it again and thought, I haven't done this justice. Let's revisit it. Now, in 30 years, someone had invented something called the World Wide Web.
Yeah, yes.
And there have been lots of books, there had been a film by Petiot, there was all this information, so I could do much more serious research. And of course that led to the novel having all these different voices, because there were a lot of characters involved, and I could now not only source documents about them, but, at one point Fred Astaire dances down one of the streets in my novel. There's a YouTube footage of him doing that. I didn't make it up. He was there, and Hemingway and a bunch of renegades liberating the bar in the Ritz. This is all true. You don't have to make it up.
Yes, Hemingway seemed to arrive very quickly after liberation, didn't he? Where was he?
Yeah. He was a crazy guy. He'd been injured in the First World War as an ambulance driver, and then written a novel about it. He'd been injured in the he'd had a head injury again in the Spanish Civil War. He was kind of bonkers, so he turned up with his sidearm and some French resistance fighters and claimed to have liberated the most famous hotel in Paris. He was supposed to be a journalist. He wasn't even supposed to be carrying a gun. After Paris was liberated, and I don't really go into this in much detail, he carried on into the Ardennes, into the final battle with the Germans. He killed Germans. He was a war correspondent.
Oh my goodness me! He was crazy, wasn't he? Yeah, he was crazy.
So there are lots of very brave, very evil, very crazy people. It's a wonderful mix.
But Paris was a strange place, wasn't it? It's a kind of happy place sometimes. A lot of Germans enjoying themselves, but then again, the Jewish deportations as well are witnessed by lots of people on the trains going mysteriously places.
Yes, most of the Jews were rounded up by French gendarmes. We mustn't forget that. The French need to forget that in a way, but I mean they did a lot of the Germans' dirty work for them.
Right.
That's an awful fact. But I mean, again, one of my characters is a German officer, and it's based on Hans Junger, who had served in the German army in Paris and had been a hero in the First World War. These are Francophiles. They could speak French. They knew Paris. It was a great posting for them. They admired French culture, not just French women and art, but the whole thing. They went into Paris, and it was like a second home to them. And they put their feet up, and they had the best seats in the restaurants. And for about 2.5 years, until everything went pear-shaped for them, they had a glorious time in Paris.
One general in there is General von Choditz, if I might say that.
Yeah.
It was at Trent Park after the war. Kind of showing regret in one hand, and then showing arrogance in another one when he was working with MI9 were watching him.
Yes, this is the most remarkable story. Just before the Germans left, they planted mines and bombs all over the place. Hitler said, blow it up.
Yeah.
General Tolchitz, who'd only been in charge for 2 weeks, said, oh, you know what, I'm not going to do that. And the famous quote is, Paris is a lady, when she slaps you in the face, you don't slap her back. and his reward was he surrenders, and he and many other top Germans were taken back to England. They were put up in a wonderful, what we would now call a Brideshead Revisited stately home in Middlesex, called Trent Park. And they could play snooker and tennis. They were taken for tea in the Ritz. They had suits in Savile Row. Why did we treat these evil men like this? Because the whole place was bugged, and everything they said was being recorded in the cellars, and they gave out all kinds of information, which helped us win the war.
And this newspaper Combat sort of started during the war and continued after the war as well, didn't it?
Yeah, there were. I mean, it's rather like Russia now. You could be shot for telling the truth. There were underground newspapers, and there was a sort of alternative press reality. It did continue for a while after the war. Yeah, and Jean-Paul Sartre, famous French writer, was involved. I mean, there were lots of. You could fight with your pen and your brain as well as with a grenade and a Bren gun.
Marcel Petiot, who was the leader of the Vichy French, what do you think of him?
Oh, he was the hero of Verdun,
Yes,
we will not surrender. He cut a deal with the Germans, didn't he?
Yeah.
A lot of people forget, the Germans didn't invade the whole of France. They couldn't have dealt with it. They cut a line through the middle, and below that was Vichy France. And Pétain and the French government sort of ran the south of France. And the Germans allowed them to do that. They were told. It allowed them to do that because that released lots of German troops who otherwise would have been tied up there.
Right.
The Germans only occupied the whole of France because Monty won El Alamein, and they thought that the Allies would invade, not across the Channel initially, but up through southern France.
Yeah.
So they said to Vichy, you know what, forget it, we're taking over the whole thing now.
Yeah, yeah. But was he lucky to escape without the death penalty at the end of the war?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, he was. If you were a young girl who'd slept with a German soldier and got pregnant, you had your head shaved and beaten up and paraded through the streets. Lots of famous people collaborated and got away with it. Two of them famously, Coco Chanel spent the whole of the war in the Ritz living with a German officer,
Oh, right.
And in the tribunal, she said, she said, a woman of my age does not ask her lover for his passport. And then Arletty, the French film star, who would, because the French film industry kept going on the Mediterranean, using quite a few Jewish directors and technicians and so on, and Germans, and the great film Les Enfants du Paradis that Arletty starred in, that was released at the end of the war. She was hold on before the premiere. She said, "My art is French, but my ass is international."
Oh my goodness me!
If you were beautiful and witty and you were well connected, you could get away with it.
Well, Tony, it's an absolutely fascinating book. I mean, it's unusual when you first open it, but you really get into it then, and it really is something completely different. Yeah, absolutely brilliant.
It is different.
Yeah,
and it's worked. It's had good reviews. I've written another one, again covering the 20th century, that starts off with Augustus John and Gwen John, the Welsh painters,
all right,
at the beginning of the century, and ends up with the Rolling Stones. I just hope somebody publishes it.
Yeah. Please do let me know if you do publish it. I'd love to talk to you about it. Yeah.
Thanks for your attention. And encourage people to read it. It's an interesting read. It's not a straight-ahead novel, but it's got so many interesting stories and voices in it.
Absolutely marvellous, yeah. Tony, thanks so much for being my After Five guest today. The book is called Darkness in the City of Light, and good luck with getting it publicised and also getting some sales on it. Absolutely brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers, man.